Have you ever noticed this strange contradiction? The part of you that craves intimacy can feel incredibly adult, and yet in the very same moment, you can react like a child, needy, afraid, ashamed, desperate to be chosen, desperate not to be left. Most people never connect those two worlds. They treat sexual energy like a separate compartment, desire here, childhood wounds over there. But Carl Jung would tell you something unsettling and liberating at the same time. The psyche doesn't separate things that way. The same inner current that reaches for connection is the same current that carries your earliest unmet needs. The same energy that pulls you toward union is also the energy that protects your younger self from pain. And if you learn how to work with it consciously, your desire stops being a source of confusion and becomes a doorway into healing the inner child, not by repressing it, not by indulging it, not by turning it into a moral battlefield, but by listening to what it symbolizes. Because in Jung's framework, libido is not merely physical, it's psychic energy, a living force that moves through images, fantasies, dreams, impulses, and emotions. And when libido intensifies, especially through attraction, it doesn't just awaken pleasure, it awakens the whole unconscious field around relationship, bonding, abandonment, safety, power, and worth. That's why someone can feel a spark with another person and suddenly become irrational, not because they're weak, not because they're broken, but because a complex got activated, an emotionally charged knot in the psyche that formed long before adult logic had a chance to develop. Jung called these complexes semi-autonomous, meaning when they're triggered, they behave like little personalities inside you. And if you've ever thought, why am I acting like this? This isn't me, Jung would gently say, it is you, but it's not all of you. It's a part of you, often younger, trying to get something it never received, or trying to prevent something it once suffered. Now here's the hook you need to hold on to for the rest of this video. The inner child doesn't primarily speak through words. It speaks through energy, through urgency, through craving, through fear, through fantasy, through the body's sudden intensity, through that electric pull that feels bigger than the situation deserves. And if you try to heal the inner child only through positive thinking or surface-level affirmations while your libido keeps running the show unconsciously, you'll keep repeating the same patterns with different faces, different names, same emotional script. So what would Jung do? He would not tell you to stop wanting. He would not shame desire. He would not reduce your longing to something crude. He would ask you to do something far more radical. Become conscious of what your desire is really aiming at. Because the ego thinks, I want them. The unconscious often says, I want wholeness. The ego says, I need this connection. The unconscious says, I need to retrieve something lost. The ego says, if they choose me, I'm safe. The unconscious says, if I integrate what I've split off, I'm free. This is why sexual symbolism in dreams is rarely literal in Jungian interpretation. It points to union, the merging of opposites, the reconciling of what has been separated, masculine and feminine within, tenderness and power, innocence and maturity, desire and safety, presence and surrender, conscious intention and unconscious truth. Now listen closely, because this part changes everything. The inner child is often the part that got split off when life demanded you adapt too early. Maybe you had to be strong. Maybe you had to be good. Maybe you learned that your needs were inconvenient. Maybe you learned that attention came only when you performed. And that younger part of you, your spontaneity, your softness, your authentic hunger for love didn't die. It went underground. It became the child archetype in Jung's terms, the vulnerable yet powerful seed of the self, the beginning of renewal, the secret center of vitality. But when the child archetype is wounded and unconscious, it doesn't appear as sweetness. It appears as compulsion. It appears as chasing. It appears as testing. It appears as fear when someone doesn't reply fast enough. It appears as needing reassurance that never fully satisfies. It appears as intensity that burns quickly and collapses into disappointment. It appears as the its energy, what Jung described as the pura aeternus, eternal youth, longing for the perfect rescue, the perfect romance, the perfect feeling that finally makes life safe. And sexual energy, because it's so potent, becomes the fastest highway to that wounded child. That's why you can be confident in your career and still feel powerless in intimacy. That's why you can be logical all day and then become emotionally flooded at night. That's why you can promise yourself you won't repeat an old pattern, and then one glance, one touch, one message, one moment of attention, and suddenly the old script runs again. So if you want to heal the inner child through your sexual energy, the first step is not technique, it's containment. Jung believed consciousness grows when you hold the tension of opposites without collapsing into one extreme. Not indulgence, not repression, but presence, holding, staying, letting the psyche reveal what it has been hiding behind the impulse. Most people do the opposite. They discharge the energy as fast as possible through fantasy, distraction, pursuit, performance, or avoidance. And every time you do that, you lose the message, you lose the gold. Because libido is not only fuel, it's information. Here's how you begin to work with it, right where you are, in real life, without turning this into some abstract theory. The next time you feel sexual energy rise, attraction, arousal, that magnetic pull, do not rush to resolve it. Just for a moment, not forever, not as a rigid rule, just long enough to catch the psyche in the act. Pause, breathe, and ask yourself a question that the wounded child cannot answer with words, but the body will answer with sensation. What am I really needing right now? Not what do I want. Needing. Do you need comfort? Do you need to feel chosen? Do you need warmth? Do you need to feel powerful? Do you need to feel safe? Do you need to feel seen? Do you need to feel wanted because being wanted makes you feel real? This is not about judging the need, it's about naming it. Because unnamed needs become compulsions, named needs become choices. Now as you name it, something else will appear. And this is where Jung becomes surgical. You will see projection. Projection is when an inner image, an archetype, gets placed onto another person. This is especially intense with the anima and animus, the inner feminine image in a man, the inner masculine image in a woman. Though Jung's deeper point is universal, we all carry inner opposites, inner contrasexual energies, inner figures that shape how we relate. When projection is active, the other person feels magical, destined, larger than life, like they hold the missing piece of you. And in a sense, they do, but not because they are the missing piece, because they activate it. They touch the sleeping child inside you. They awaken the part of you that once believed love would finally fix everything. And if you don't reclaim that projection, if you don't take back the energy you placed outside yourself, you'll keep chasing people for an internal job they can never complete. So here's the second step. When desire appears, don't only focus on the other person. Track the image. What is the fantasy? What is the story? What does your mind insist will happen if you merge, connect, finally have them, finally be chosen? Is it, then I'll be enough? Is it, then I won't be alone? Is it, then I can relax? That's the inner child speaking through adult desire. And now, instead of acting it out, you do something Jungian, and it will feel unusual at first because it requires you to become the parent your psyche never fully had. You turn toward the child part directly. Not with childish language, with presence. You say internally, calmly, I feel you. You don't say, stop it. You don't say, you're embarrassing. You don't say, we shouldn't need this. That's how the wound deepens. You say, I feel you. I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to protect me. You're trying to get love. You're trying to make sure we don't get abandoned again. Just that acknowledgement done sincerely begins integration. Because what the inner child craves most is not gratification, it's recognition. It's being brought back into consciousness instead of being exiled into the basement of the psyche. This is where many people get scared, because when you stop discharging the energy immediately, the energy doesn't disappear. It intensifies. And that's good. Not comfortable, but good, because now you can witness what it contains. Sexual energy, when held, becomes like heat in alchemy. Jung was fascinated by alchemy because he saw it as a symbolic mirror of psychic transformation. Raw material goes into the vessel. The fire is applied. The material breaks down, reorganizes, and something new emerges. Your libido is raw material. Your consciousness is the vessel. And your ability to stay present without acting out is the fire. But there's a catch. When the fire rises, the shadow rises too. This is why some people, when they try to be mindful with desire, suddenly feel shame, anger, sadness, emptiness, or even disgust. They assume something is wrong. Jung would say something is finally becoming conscious, because the inner child doesn't only carry innocence, it carries everything it had to swallow: humiliation, fear, loneliness, rage, unmet longing, the pain of being misunderstood, the pain of not being held, and sexual energy, because it reaches so deep, stirs the whole field. So the third step is shadow work, but not the trendy version. Not "I accept my shadow" as a slogan. Real shadow work, meeting the emotions that were split off when you were young. Ask yourself without dramatizing it, what feeling is underneath this arousal? Sometimes it's tenderness, sometimes it's grief, sometimes it's loneliness, wearing perfume. Sometimes it's anger that never had permission to speak. Sometimes it's a hunger to be enveloped, to be protected, to be reassured. And here's the important part. You do not need to resolve it in the moment. You only need to stay with it long enough to stop being possessed by it. Jung's goal was not to make you pure, it was to make you whole. Wholeness means you can feel desire and not be hijacked. You can feel longing and not collapse. You can feel attraction and still remain in yourself. And now the inner child begins to trust you. Because for the first time, the child part sees an adult presence that doesn't disappear the moment intensity shows up. This is reparenting at the level of libido. Now we go deeper, because healing the inner child is not just soothing it, it's also freeing its energy. The inner child is life force, play, creativity, spontaneity, wonder, the ability to feel without immediately armoring. When it's wounded, it becomes anxious and compulsive. When it's integrated, it becomes radiant and creative. So how do you convert sexual energy into healing energy? Through sublimation, properly understood. People misunderstand sublimation as suppression. Jung did not mean you clamp down on desire. He meant you lift the energy into a higher expression. You allow libido to move upward, through the psyche, into creativity, into courage, into honesty, into the kind of intimacy that is not performance, but presence. Here is a practice that Jung would recognize immediately, because it works directly with the unconscious, active imagination. When libido rises, especially when it feels tangled with longing, sit quietly and give the energy an image, not a fantasy of another person, an image of the child within. You don't force it, you let it appear. Maybe it appears as a younger version of you. Maybe as a symbol, a room, a doorway, a small figure, a forgotten object. Jung taught that the psyche speaks in symbols, and the inner child archetype often appears as something small and precious that needs protection. Now, instead of analyzing, you dialogue. Ask the child, what are you afraid will happen if we don't chase this? Ask, what do you think you need to be safe? Ask, what do you want me to know? Then listen, not with your logical mind, but with your felt sense. The answers might come as words, images, sensations, memories. And when something arises, you do the most important thing a wounded child needs. You stay. You don't argue. You don't correct. You don't say, that's irrational. You say, I'm here. I'm not leaving. That sentence internally can melt years of unconscious panic, because the core wound of the inner child is not that it didn't get everything it wanted. It's that it felt alone with what it felt. And many adults repeat that pattern. They feel something intense and they abandon themselves by escaping into stimulation, distraction, chasing, or shutting down. So when you remain present with libido, you are doing the opposite. You are staying with yourself. This is why sexual energy can heal the inner child, because libido is a direct line to the youngest layers of the psyche. And if you can bring love, structure, and awareness into that line, you stop repeating the past. Now, there's another layer Jung would insist you face: the mother and father imprints, what later psychology would call attachment patterns. But Jung framed it through complexes and archetypal images. If your desire becomes clingy, frantic, terrified of rejection, there may be a mother complex activated, a deep pattern around nurturance, safety, acceptance. If your desire becomes performative, competitive, needing to prove worth, there may be a father complex activated, a deep pattern around approval, authority, accomplishment. This is not about blaming parents. Jung wasn't interested in blame. He was interested in liberation. Liberation comes when you recognize this feeling is old, not in the sense that it's invalid, in the sense that it is a repetition. So the fourth step is this: when you feel desire, notice whether the energy is flowing from adult fullness or from child hunger. Adult fullness says, I want connection, and I can stay grounded even if it doesn't happen. Child hunger says, I need this to feel okay, and if it doesn't happen, something inside me panics. When you notice child hunger, don't shame it. This is crucial. Shame is what keeps the complex in the dark. Instead, do something counterintuitive. Give the child part what it's actually seeking, but from within. If it seeks warmth, offer warmth. You can literally place a hand on your chest and breathe slowly, signaling safety to your nervous system. If it seeks reassurance, speak reassurance internally. We are okay. We can handle discomfort. We are not abandoned. If it seeks to be seen, journal a few lines from the child's voice, not to indulge it, but to witness it. If it seeks protection, set a boundary in your life that you've been avoiding, because sometimes the inner child doesn't need more romance. It needs you to stop betraying yourself. Now notice what happens as you do this. At first, the libido may fluctuate. It may spike. It may soften. It may transform into emotion. This is the psyche moving energy from one channel to another. And if you keep practicing, you'll begin to feel something extraordinary. Desire becomes less desperate, more clean, less anxious, more alive, less tangled with fear, more connected to meaning. This is the beginning of individuation, becoming a person who is not run by unconscious fragments. And now we reach a Jungian secret that most people never hear in the modern conversation about sexuality. Eros is not just attraction. Eros is the principle of relatedness, the capacity to connect with life, with yourself, with others, with the depths. When Eros is wounded in childhood, you may seek connection through intensity rather than intimacy. You may confuse being wanted with being loved. You may chase chemistry because it gives you a temporary identity. So healing the inner child through sexual energy means transforming intensity into intimacy. And intimacy in Jung's language is an inner marriage, the union of opposites within you. This is where your sexual energy stops being about getting and becomes about integrating. You integrate your tenderness with your strength. You integrate your longing with your stability. You integrate your innocence with your discernment. You integrate your passion with your boundaries. And as these opposites unite, the psyche no longer needs to act out the child's wound in adult relationships. This is why some connections feel addictive. They keep the split alive. The psyche keeps reaching outward because it doesn't yet know how to unite inward. So here is the fifth step. Hold the tension of opposites deliberately. The next time you feel a strong pull, do this inner experiment. Feel the desire fully in your body without acting, and at the same time, feel your own presence fully without collapsing. Let both exist: longing and self-possession, warmth and sovereignty, attraction and inner safety. This is what Jung called the transcendent function. When you hold opposing forces without choosing one, a third thing emerges: new consciousness, a new response, a new identity. Not forced, emerged. And that new consciousness is what heals the inner child, because the child finally experiences an adult self that can contain emotion without being overwhelmed. Now we go even more practical, because if this stays conceptual, you'll nod along and then return to old patterns the next time. Energy rises. So here are the moments when you practice, because transformation does not happen in ideal conditions. It happens in the real triggers. Practice when you feel the urge to seek validation. Practice when you feel the urge to check, to chase, to prove. Practice when you feel the urge to disappear, to numb, to detach. In that moment, you don't need a perfect ritual. You need one conscious interruption, a breath, a pause, a question. Which part of me is driving right now? If the answer is the child, then you become the adult. And you do one adult thing. You choose a response that protects your dignity and nourishes your wholeness. That might mean you don't send the message. That might mean you do send it, but from calm rather than panic. That might mean you redirect the energy into creation. Write, move your body, speak truth you've been swallowing. because libido can become courage if you stop leaking it. And as you stop leaking it, something else happens. The inner child begins to return without desperation, not as a wound begging to be filled, as a living presence inside you. You start to feel more playful, more creative, more emotionally honest. You start to experience attraction without losing yourself. You start to feel intimacy, not as a performance, but as a meeting. And here's a subtle sign you're healing. Your fantasies change. When the inner child is wounded, fantasy often revolves around being rescued, being chosen, being consumed, being proven worthy. When the inner child is integrating, fantasy becomes less about validation and more about communion, less about proving, more about presence, less about escape, more about truth. Now there's one final barrier Jung would make you face because it sits at the core of inner child pain and it hides behind desire like a mask, the fear of being truly seen. The child learned, if I'm fully seen, I might be rejected, so the adult hides behind roles: seducer, achiever, caretaker, pleaser, detached strong one. Sexual energy can either reinforce those masks or burn them off. If you use libido to perform, the child stays hidden. If you use libido to be present, the child comes home. So the next time you feel that energy rise, try this. Instead of asking, how do I become more desirable? Ask, where am I afraid to be real? Because the inner child doesn't heal when you become perfect. It heals when you become honest and safe with yourself. And safety is not someone else's job. It becomes your inner climate. This is why Jung's path is so demanding and so liberating. It doesn't promise you'll never feel longing again. It promises you won't be possessed by it. It doesn't promise you'll never be triggered. It promises you'll recognize the trigger as a doorway. It doesn't promise you'll never want. It promises you'll want from wholeness, not from hunger. So right now, as you're listening, I want you to imagine something, not as a story about someone else, but as a moment you will inevitably face again in your own life. A moment when desire rises. A moment when the child part tries to take the wheel. In that moment you will have a choice. You can do what you've always done: chase, numb, perform, collapse, or avoid. Or you can do the alchemical thing: hold it, feel it, and listen. And if you listen long enough, without fear, you will hear what the inner child has been trying to say through your body all along. Not give me someone, but don't leave me. Not make them choose me, but choose me. Not fill this emptiness, but stay with me while it hurts. And when you do, the energy doesn't disappear. It transforms. It becomes steadiness. It becomes clarity. It becomes a warmth that doesn't beg. It becomes a quiet power that doesn't need to dominate. It becomes the kind of presence that makes intimacy real, not because you finally found the perfect person, but because you finally stopped abandoning the most important relationship of all, the one with your own soul.